Hello and welcome. This is Jonathan McGuinness on the Questions of Fire broadcast. I'm delighted today to welcome many more members into the club. It seems that quite a few people are joining and liking to provoke each other. Today, I'm delighted to have another very driven person who I met years ago in the city of Dublin, where I'm from. Before I get into who he is, let me just first welcome Shay Lynch. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. Delighted to talk to you and your
Excellent.
teams and network.
Excellent. So, what I'd like to say first of all about the intro to Shay, I met him years ago at a business function in Dublin. We have a lot of, how would I say, very dynamic common people. We have people from some colleges in Dublin. We have Brian Colbert, who's the lead for NLP within Ireland. So all of the people that we have in common are also quite driven, and that in itself was part of why I pay a little bit more attention. Recently now, Shay has done something that I'm very curious about. He's put on LinkedIn and he's put on social media webinars that are showing people a taste of his expertise. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. And what's interesting for me is most of the economies of all of the world is over 50% run by small and medium businesses. Now, to go from a small business in order to, we'll say, scale up to a medium or a large business of any sort, you need to clarify what your processes are. You clarify how you work so you can put other people in instead of people who are leaving and need to go on to do other or better things within the organization as it grows. This is what Shay has been specializing in. And I was delighted there a couple of weeks ago to dip into one of his webinars and thought this is something that could be really useful for small entrepreneurs because they see the road ahead, or those who've already built up an organization of 50 or 100 and they're considering the idea to scale. Shay, very welcome. And I'd love to know, I suppose, to start with, how did you get into this? You know, what makes someone go through the process of ending up, or helping small organizations have that capacity to scale?
That's a really good question, Jonathan. And it's not a straight road to that answer, right? It has not been a linear path. Like going back, I'm an engineer by trade, right?
Yeah.
So building systems is what I've always done. And I always wanted to be an engineer. And since I was a little kid, then I got into college, got my degree. First day out of college, in my first job, within 2 weeks, I decided I didn't want to be an engineer anymore. Once I realized it was all doing non-conformist reports, quality reports, all these type of paperwork, that's not what I did engineering for. And I was lucky enough to get into a thing called process improvement. And over the last 20 years, I've been really betting my skills and betting them. And I was lucky enough to get to a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. And so I was always doing efficiency programs for companies in departments in different areas of their business. So I was in sales. I do lean programs in sales and operations, marketing, warehousing, logistics, and so forth, and even finance. And so I got to see all the different elements of a business, first of all. And I also started doing work on energy efficiency, and I got really interested in that. And then I set up a business just before the last recession in 2008 that designed, supplied, and installed renewable energy systems into commercial and large domestic buildings.
Yeah.
That's when I really got to transfer my lean and process skills into a business environment. But that obviously sort of changed a little bit when the recession happened. So it got really, really difficult, and I really had to step back and figure this out, because we could have liquidated the business. We were owed 7 figures, Jonathan, at one stage, and we really had to dig deep to figure it out. And we decided we did, because we had 12 mouths to feed. We didn't want to put them on the out of a job. So we really worked hard on building a systems thinking approach to business. And over the course of a year or two, we really dug deep and turned the company around and thrived and figured out how to thrive in bad times. And I decided in the end to sell my share of that business and then go out and teach companies what I do and how they can thrive in good times and bad. So I've been doing that, Jonathan, since about 2010. So I've been working at
Okay.
this a long, long time now, but it's really all
So,
about
so
taking,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Apologies.
taking a systems thinking approach to business, like knowing what you do and how you can build on and build a blueprint to what you're talking about scaling. You need to know what you do. If you want to plug and play a business into a different environment or just grow, you need to be able to plug and play. It's as simple as that.
So when I think of this, Shay, like I also have an engineering, but it's more of a software engineering background. I'm aware of process, we say re-engineering. I think it started off, if I remember correctly, in Toyota with just in time, or they were
Yeah,
one of the pioneers
absolutely.
of
Yeah.
this type of thing. I remember reading a book called The Goal
You know,
by Elliot, and it's fantastic. It tells in story format this type of process. But when we think of what you do, or what people would perceive that, and being a black belt is actually no mean feat. I've worked in a lot of organizations. It's not an overnight job to get to the understanding of black belt, and sort of conceptualize many of the things, and reconceptualize them, and rechange how an organization works. So first of all, congratulations on that, because that's not an easy step in itself.
thank you.
So what I think of then when I do that, because my background, including CMMI, maturity models for organizations, etc., is big organizations. So what I'm thinking is, you have the capacity or competence of what a big organization normally has, and you're able to now bring that to a smaller organization. How does that how would someone know, okay, when's the right time to reach out to an expert like Shane and say, okay, well, my business is ready to scale? What are the signs that they might see to say, hold on, I'm losing traction. I'm not getting as enough sales as I want to. Yeah, I don't even know what these answers are, but I'm kind of asking you,
Yeah.
who's the potential person that might, what type typical problems would they have in order to say, hold on, I need to reach out to Mr. Lynch and see what he can help me do?
Well, it's actually a really good question, John. I'm going to answer that in a few different ways because what I often do is go into companies who have scaled organically and then they've got to a stage where they can't grow anymore because of the way they've scaled has constrained them. Or if they want to go into a new demographic that they can't because their internal process, their issues with their process are so big that could come to a critical mass in their business and cause lots of issues. So the real point in time where companies should look to someone like me is when they know, well, I've got multiple people in my business. I now have multiple processes that I'm not doing. I have other people doing. And now I need to understand how can I not just be functionally excellent, be cross-functionally excellent. So when you start looking at all those different moving parts of a business and you have different people, and that may still sound small, Jonathan, you can still be small and turn over a lot of money, but it's when
Sure.
you start having multiple people in your business is the key. Because the problem is what I see, and I go in and have to fix these issues, is that your sales team goes that direction, your marketing team goes that direction, you know, service delivery goes another way. And there's no sort of glue in the middle to bring them all together. What are those sweet spots where you need really good crossover so you can keep everything balanced and aligned, complementing each other, not contradicting, and
So,
that's a
so
real key.
I have a question then from, like, I'm coming from a systems and mostly technology background. What this sounds like to me, or a potential parallel is when an organization is big enough to begin thinking about putting in an enterprise resource, an ERP
Mm.
system to try and manage operations, marketing, sales, all of the other accountings all in one system. Would there be some overlap between the introduction of those systems and the leverage of your sort of expertise in sort of defining and redefining processes?
Absolutely. And I would like what I always say, Jonathan, first is I'd always say get the process right first before you think software. And then once
Sure.
you get the processes right, then you can build your requirements and then see, well, what is the right system for me? Because another issue I always see, Jonathan, like I'll just give one example of a CRM system, a customer relationship management. I go into companies and like they see all their team spend 80% of the time trying to manage a piece of software as opposed to 80% of the time managing customers because they get
Sure.
lost in the software. So what I often have to do is take them off the software and build an Excel, just a little pilot proof of concept in Excel. Well, what do we want the CRM system to do for our business? You know, and we map it out and we do it manually. It may be inefficient in the short term, but we'll map out our requirements as we go. Then we'll look to see, does that system we have fulfill our requirements? If it does, great. We only limit our use to those. We only enable those features. But if it doesn't, we have to look for something else. Because the key is the software should always complement the process, as far as I'm concerned. You know, and once you get the processes, you understand them, then you find the right system. And it could be multiple systems depending on what your goal is. But there's so much crossover, John. I can't stress the importance of getting the sweet spot between the process and the technology. In fact, I always, when I'm looking at companies, I put a lens on it. Obviously, you've got leadership and strategy at the top, but underneath it's people,
Sure.
process, technology, and they're the three lenses. And where do you get the complement in the middle, that sweet spot in the middle? Because I'm not telling you any lie when I say I go into companies and everything contradicts each other, and it causes so much issues. And whatever, where the issue was started, when it was the issue driver, where it ends up, it could be multiple issues embedded, you know?
Okay, so like I would say with most businesses, their primary concern is bringing in money. So they will generally start with marketing or sales as their primary processes, out
Yeah.
of the pure need to bring in revenue to pay the staff, etc. Would there be a tendency for that to be the initial area for someone like you to get called in, or it because of a bigger problem? Obviously, client to client is very different, I'm sure, Shay.
Yeah, well, it's different, but like I don't have any particular starting point, Jonathan. But what I normally work with companies on, right, is sales and operations at the same time, because they're both. You talk about cash, bringing cash in. There's one thing bringing cash in. There's another thing holding on to it, right?
Sure.
So profits and cash flow are the two main drivers that I try and work with. And the reason why I say that is because I'll always look using the Lean Six Sigma skills, right? My goal is to make their operations as efficient as possible, right? And create capacity. So you do that by removing waste. So you're creating capacity in your business, right? And while I'm
Sure.
doing that, I'm going to be working on their and it's a systems approach to developing a sales performance process, and it's all about increasing conversions. So by the time I'm working on the two of them, the goal is to try and get the waterfall of new sales coming at the same time as when I create that capacity, because two things happen then. You're going to reduce your lead time to develop your service or product, then lead time to deliver and invoice. So your cash cycle is going to improve. You're going to invoice
Yeah.
quicker, right? That's the first thing. But then if you start dropping new sales in on top of that, then you've got more sales, but no added resources. So it's a double profits. Your profits are, it's a double profits. So
Excellent.
that's what I try and work on. And the key then is we talk about scaling. To me, if someone says to me they want to scale and they bring me in, this is where I start. I want to see, can we scale without scaling our costs first, right?
Sure.
So that's my first goal. Then we do a stage gate process where we maybe go into a stability phase where we ensure that we can control this,
Yeah.
because we don't want to grow too fast. And then once we're happy and we pass all the stage gate criteria, then we go scale again. And you take it step by step. But normally, as you said, going back to companies, what they normally want to bring me in is to sell or to scale. But sometimes I have to do a bit of remodeling underneath first before they get there.
Yeah, well, in essence, they have either visible bottlenecks or maybe hidden bottlenecks, which you probably see, I guess, bringing to the wealth of experience to say, well, you don't see it now, but these various items will cause you a problem if we do try to scale.
Absolutely, and I've had to talk with some company, one particular company in Dublin, a distribution company. They were looking to move into the UK market, and I said, well, and they asked me, we need to build, you need to build an operating manual first so we can do that. And I said, well, look, let me assess your business first to see what I need to do. And once I started uncovering their process and doing a current state analysis of it all, I found too many issues. And if they did scale, Jonathan, it would have put their business at risk. So what companies ask me to do, what I end up doing for them are not always the same thing.
So here's a question then. In terms of scaling, this year has been quite an interesting, I would say, lateral move for many people. They've gone virtual. in some respects, they've lost cost, at least from office. Well, some are still maintaining their office, but maybe that's on a temporary basis. But they've also lost communication. So the idea of having clear process has probably become more prevalent, more important than ever. Are there particular strategies that are very useful for organizations that were previously heavily physical presence, we'll call it high touch, to going low touch as a low touch organization where all or most things are remote? Are there particular first considerations that they should be thinking about, Shay?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jonathan. And funny enough, like I've actually been working with customers like this for a very long time. I've actually taught companies to hire remotely. So software companies, for example, I worked with companies so they couldn't get the pool of people they required within in Ireland. So
Yeah,
I had to help them hire abroad, and then we'd have to create processes to control how we do things, to ensure. And the interesting thing, the point that you say there is there's certain criteria indeed, and process becomes more prevalent, right? Because you need to understand if you can't do the normal sort of management control process in an environment where everyone's together, you need to make sure you can. And we need to develop new mechanisms to do that, and processes need to be mapped out clear, because the goal is, we want to go from a sort of a time-based to a results-based business, right? So if you
yeah,
can't control people, and it's a company called Atlassian that I sort of first came across this, like I'm talking 20 years ago, or even 15, 20 years ago, and they call it a results orientated work environment,
yeah.
where you say, well, you're working remotely. These are the 10 things that we need to do this week. And you agree them between both parties. So there's an agreement. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I don't care when you do them. I don't care if you're sober or drunk or anything like that. But if they're done to a certain quality by the end of the week, they're happy, and they're
So
usually
So then, do you effectively you have a rolling, we say, statement of work that gets checked off in some form of process and then backed up by software in some way?
absolutely, and we create controls. But one thing I would always stress when you're in a remote environment, there's two things. One is the process. You need to have a very clear understanding of your processes, and many companies don't, Jonathan. And this sort of forces them to think like this because now they need to. They need to see how everything's aligned, because people are more siloed than ever in one regard. So they need to see them more in an end-to-end process. That's the first thing. The second thing is about the people side of things, because there's no point in having all these great processes if your teams are struggling remotely. So you really need to get a good handle on your team dynamic, your team culture, and your team well-being. And that has become really prevalent now, because what I'm finding in the marketplace is that people are spending more time uptime,
Yeah.
in work, less downtime, more meetings, so more video calls, more everything, less time to do things. So meetings will always serve the purpose to improve what you need to do and guide what you need to do. Now they're like 70, on average, 70 to 80% of people's day, so it leaves that very little time to actually get things done. And that to me is, I'm seeing as the biggest crux at the moment that people need to solve.
Well, I fortunately have been in this type of environment for a long, long time, being technology
Mhm.
and being a project manager. Quite often, you're almost running meeting to meeting and then delegating stuff in between meetings to other people. What I have found with technology is that if you're there, even if you've I don't want to mention brand names, but you have an internal messaging system and you're present, then people assume that they can, interrupt you, talk to you, do whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're available. Now, it obviously depends job to job. Obviously, at a leader or management role, you want to be interacting maybe frequently. But if you have definitely a research job, or you're actually developing software, or you're working on a particular machine, you don't want to be interrupted that regularly. So you'll just wait. But what I was about to talk about is now that people who haven't had that experience of years of realizing a message can wait because I have a priority with my job, they feel an extra need to be present and to react that they probably have never felt before. How can that be managed within? I imagine this is one of the difficulties that you could be referring to, Shay.
You know, it is, Jonathan, and there is that stress to be more time available, even though you're in a lot of meetings, and there's a lot more interruption. So again, there's many challenges, and for me, there's the big one is well-being of the people,
Yeah,
because they've had to adapt. Not only they had to adapt to a different way of work, not everybody is tech savvy, right? So they've had to
sure.
have a steep learning curve, but also for a lot of people with families that are now homeschooling, and like they have kids on their feet in the back of the camera on the meeting. So there's an added stress that's been added to a lot of people's lives, right? So I think companies, what they need to do is first be very mindful of their team's well-being and focus on building a more flexible dynamic. So it's not all about 9 to 5, it's all about, well, we need to get 10 things done in a week, for example.
Sure.
Let's figure out when is the best time, when it suits you. And then there's a bit where we can't overload your diary with meetings either. So you need to have time to actually get things done. So there's a flexibility that has to be given by management now. So gone are the days, as far as I'm concerned, of micromanagement. And any micromanager here that's still here should really think about how they get things done in the future, because it will not work. It will not work. It'll only agitate people. And when you agitate people who are already agitated because they may have more stresses at home, it's going to either break or they're going to leave. You're going to remove good people.
So you've mentioned a couple of things, and I'd like to sort of make a reference, Shay. One was processes, and I can think of a couple of examples. CMMI, which is a capability maturity model that's used in a lot of big organizations from level 1 to 5. NASA is level 5 because code has to be tested so many times by so many people. And then, bigger organizations try and build their way up there. But process alone doesn't necessarily consider people. And this shift in how would you say a person needs to be treated, what their needs are while they're in work, as well as these processes. So even when we refer to, you said earlier, you work with processes, but it's not that simple. You have to take the bigger picture of people, processes, leadership, and other elements. How do they work together?
Well, that's a very good question. That's the magic bullet, Jonathan. That's the goal that I always aim to achieve. And I'm going to tell you a little story about. I was at a conference a number of years ago, and you mentioned Toyota earlier on. Well, that's what I learned initially, was the Toyota production system. And there was an American general manager from one of the plants there talking about their new plant building Toyota cars, and some guy from the audience asked a question, well, how can you say you've got standard work when I know I've been in one of your plants in Japan and they have different procedures than what you have in your plant here in America. Can you explain that? And he goes, it's simple that we explain that because we got the people within each building to design the standards. Yes, they may be slightly different, but here's the thing, we let them build them and then they own them. They buy into them because they built them. Management didn't tell them what to do. They built them. And that's the big thing, Jonathan, when it comes to standard work. We build the processes together. I don't go in and tell them what to do. I have management, I have all the stakeholders. We build it together as a team. Because I probably could have a good understanding what best practice would look like, but there's no use me telling them. They don't learn. I draw that out of them. And then we work. We would map it out on a wall, and then we type it up. We talk about what's good, what's bad, what needs to change. And then we build our idea of what we want the process to look like. Then we test it, we pilot it. And then through that process, they embed it. And management are involved in that as well. So it becomes their process because they built it. And
so the ownership is what helps the people be part of whatever process is designed, because they're part of it. They're the draft, they're the working, etc.
But here's the thing, I'll tell you now, Jonathan, like while I would, from all my experience, I have a lot of good ideas naturally because I've seen things being implemented. I have the experience. But when I go into these companies, like these people on the ground, if you engage them correctly, if you make them feel part of what you're trying to achieve as a business, they will come with you. They've got great
Hmm.
ideas that you're not getting out of them because you're not engaging them the right way. Like again, if I can give you another example, again, I won't mention the company. It's a well-known company, and I was looking at helping their processes, and I was doing a workshop with a group with a team, and I noticed there was a few people who were really quiet
Yeah.
during the first hour, and we took a break, and it was a process improvement workshop, and I asked a particular lady, let's call her Mary, and I said, Mary, how are you getting on? What do you think about this? And she goes, well, to be honest, Shay, we've done all this before. It's all great motivation in the beginning, but it dies at death because management never listened to our ideas. And I said, right, tell me one
Sure.
of your ideas. And she told me one idea, Jonathan. I can't tell you how good it was. And I asked her, I said, like, I'm going to ask people for some good ideas in the afternoon. Will you please say that and I'll support you? And then I'll make sure something is done about it because I think you're really onto something here. And so she did, in fairness to her. And I said, that's great. Now let's gather some data to see will it actually make sense in the real world. So we
Yeah.
gathered some data, and then we actually did a pilot study, and then it got embedded. And guess how much money that saved the year, Johnson, for that company? It
No
was up
idea,
the
Shay.
north. It was £15 million a year it saved. And
Wow.
she had brought that to management already before, and she was told it wasn't a good idea. So my
Yeah.
point of telling you that is that engager, don't just be managing yourself up, because that's what people tend to do in management. They manage up, they don't lead down, and they need to lead their people. You should be spending 30% of your time as a manager with your team in some form, either on their own or as a team, but you need to be spending time. You need to develop them because they have all your answers, you know. And if
Okay.
you engage them correctly, because they're doing the do on the ground, they've got the subject matter expertise. And if I can draw it out of them in a few weeks, you should be able to draw it out of them, you know. And they have all that knowledge, those golden nuggets. You need to draw that out. And if you do, Jonathan, you'll have a better engaged and more high performing team.
So, Shay, these sound like the change projects, the initial change projects when you're brought in, but every organization is continuously changing. So, it's one thing to come in and do a change and get buy in. How do you leave it in such a way, or how do you set it up in such a way that continuous change, development of those, streamlining of them, or addition to them, depending. Like I know a lot about this because of software. In software, when you develop huge systems, and I've developed for some of the biggest companies in the world, they become monstrosities. And we have a thing called software entropy. Entropy means you develop things for business functionality, but it takes a life on its own. And it's the redesign of incorporating that into the overall system and being overall effective is rarely done. Ideally, you would leave 10 to 15% of your budget every time you did a cycle for doing that, but businesses often trump it or regulations trump it, so it doesn't happen. So now that that's becoming more important, how could people become ambassadors to actually insist on that improvement becoming part of the process of their organization? It's not really about software, it's about the process. I'm just talking from a
Yeah,
software
no,
perspective, but it's the same thing, you know?
it's bang on, Jonathan. Like it's so important that company, like as far as I'm concerned, like I'm lucky to be from an improvement background, and that's what I always do. That is always the goal. But I'll tell you now, straight up, if you're not moving forward, improving in your business, you're moving backwards because things are changing so quickly. Like marketplaces are being disrupted. You may think you have a small business, but some company's going to come in and disrupt that. You cannot take your eye off the ball. Like even if you look at the big examples, what Netflix did to Blockbuster, you know, change. The only constant now in business is change, and business need to have change as part and parcel of what they do. And what I mean by that, Jonathan, from an improvement perspective, is that if I'm going in, I'm going to do some process improvements with them. I'm going to help them with their strategy. I'm going to work in their
Sure.
sales. And, you know, but you're right. When I leave, will all that good work go? So what I always aim to do is create that sustainable model where I'll start seeing, can I identify champions in their business while I'm there? And then I'll present a proposal in terms of, well, when I go, I want a new metric on one of your pillar metrics is to be improvement. I want someone to lead it out on the management suite or C suite, depending on how big. and I want someone to be the champion on the ground doing the do. And I will commit to training that person, but you need to commit to ensuring that becomes part of their profile. And that's something they're interested in. And then they report on it, and it has to be reported at a board level. So you build that sort of, because if you don't get that board buy-in or management buy-in, it'll never happen. Because it'll just be a nice to have. It has to become part of their metrics, their monthly,
Sure.
yearly, daily metrics like that are reported on. How are you improving? And like I always say, if you want to improve, you should be spending 20% of your time on improvement activities to
Sure.
actually make that improvement. And you should, if you think about it, in the beginning, you're going to have to waste time to do that. But after that, it should give you time to do that. Because the more you improve, the more free time you have. And you split that free time between doing more value-added work and then also some more improvement work.
So what I've done, because I have a lot of big organizations. Well, I go in as a consultant into big organizations, and they often have two sections of their departments, and they have a run the company and a change the company. So people either generally work in one or the other, and you need a combination. So you almost need to set up a change the company organization, or at least leadership. As you were saying, it has to start with leadership, and that they say, well, there's enough happening here that we need an organization or a subset of people for that to be their constant focus, depending on the size of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to be the focus, Jonathan. Like, if you and always the danger is with small business, you're too busy doing the do, you're too busy firefighting. And it really takes like hard work to get out of that. And what I find with small companies is that we talked about getting all those processes, and I always say to companies, there's one thing being functionally excellent. You can have a great sales process, but it may contradict your marketing process, which may contradict your delivery, like demand process, right? So it's so important to be cross-functionally excellent, as I said, those sweet spots, right? The only way you can do that is have someone in that sort of role of managing everything, looking at things constantly and saying, well, what's worked well, what didn't, what do we need to have to change? That needs to be part and parcel of the day-to-day work. Normally you start off as an external team doing that, but as it gets embedded in the culture, it should become part of the process. And that should remove the need for that team. And a small business, a large business, there's always going to be change. So it's a different.
So a question then as well on the human element, Shay. When a change project comes into an organization, people who are within the organization tend to have a fear, a natural fear, a worry. Will I still have a job? Will I still have? The worst case is, will I not have a job anymore? Will I be able to do what I currently do? Will it be different? Will I still be in the same group of people? As on the human level of work, which is now different, obviously, if we're working virtual, how is it best for organizations to introduce the idea of change one is, obviously, you mentioned it earlier, you give those people the responsibility for implementing the change, but that they have some awareness of what's going to come after it before it also happens, because they could either be an enabler or a Luddite and throw a shoe in the machine, as they say, depending on how that change is managed psychologically. Shay, are there any hints in that area?
Yeah, it's a huge question to get answered, right, Jonathan? Because, and what I normally go into companies and say, like there's two sayings, and even though I go back to the word lean has got a dirty word in some industries because lean has been used to cut costs. The principle of lean is about adding value at the lowest possible cost. There's a subtle difference, but people use it as a cost-cutting exercise. I don't tend to work in those in environments because it's not right. But what I always say to companies is that instead of doing a project so you get into a situation that you want to do the same but less, how about a situation where you do more with the same? You scale your business without scaling your cost. That's what I always say. And that was the example I gave earlier on, where I go in and work in the sales and operations. And that's what I always aim for, because companies don't realize that Sometimes the answer isn't cutting costs. Sometimes the answer is doing more, and especially marketing, as you mentioned earlier on. Companies in recessionary times tend to not market anymore. But imagine you're a company there going, well, you know what? I know my competition aren't marketing. How about I do some marketing? Like
Sure.
I'm getting more voice. I'm getting people are seeing me. I'm more visible, you know. And then if you did do that, when things come good again, you're going to be the first person people look at. So it's not always advantageous because if you get into the cost cutting spiral, you can't get out of it. Your business shrinks, Jonathan. So I always emphasize do not enter the cost cutting spiral unless it's crisis management, unless you have no choice, you know.
Doesn't that often happen, Shay? And these are sort of just personal observations of mine. If you go to a public company, every quarter they have reports, and depending on the profit on the quarter, i.e., cutting costs and up in revenue, it looks better on the stock market. The share prices rise, and they're happy. So the consequences to the employee is different. Whereas if you look at a company, and it can be public or private, but they have a longer term goal, they often see their employees or their infrastructure as an investment towards getting to the goal, and they will forego short-term profits and that type of mentality that you're talking about in order to achieve that long-term goal. And therefore the employee is seen as a valuable resource, even if not in the current format, but in a future format with their background to help us get towards that goal. Does it say something about sort of the management and board vision of what they actually want to do as a company?
Oh, it does, absolutely, Jonathan. And I'll tell you now, like your team can be your best assets or worst liabilities, depending on how you treat them. And
Mm-hmm.
the companies that have ridden this storm over the last 12 months are the companies who treated their team well. Because when they're back against the wall, right, teams will do more above and beyond because they know it's a two-way thing. And there's one of my favorite laws in business called the law of reciprocation, Jonathan, where
Yeah.
you help someone, makes you feel good because you helped them, and it makes them feel good because they got out of a hole, and then they're going to help you when the tides are turned. You get into that situation where not just people on the ground help each other, but the different management levels help each other. When you get that working really well, like you'll have a team that want to come in and do work and help you because they believe in you. They believe in you because you're not just a boss, you're a friend.
Yeah.
And I believe
Yeah.
in business, you should be full of friends because friends look after each other. And happy if you go into an environment where people are looking forward to coming to work, they look forward to helping each other, they work together, they're synergistic. Happy teams are performing people. You know, and that's
Mm-hmm.
the environment, and that's something that I see more of, like more proof of it in small business than I do in large business, because like people feel in small business they're a part of something. They have a bigger part to play in the success, and they take it more
Absolutely.
seriously. And I really enjoy. And again, even when I go into small businesses and help them, when they see something is going to work, they adopt it immediately. They're so fast
Brilliant.
with implementation. There's no politics. There's no red tape. They see this is something that can help them, and they do it. So it's
Excellent.
great. It's really good to see how dynamic small businesses can be.
That is fantastic. And that's hopefully fantastic for the future of the small businesses as they go through this change, Shane. My question, Shay, is you've learned a lot. I can hear from the different areas you're capable, and cross working those areas requires you to have sort of a background of history and knowledge, and probably mistakes and everything else as well to get to that point. If you were to go back to the younger self, the younger Shay, let's say you 18-year-old, and you could give him a piece of advice now with the wisdom that you have on your head, what one piece of advice would you give to the young Shay?
Yeah, I know the answer to that very quickly, Jonathan. Learn communication skills very quickly. Learn them well. And I'm not just talking about like talking to people. I'm talking about active listening. I'm talking about filtering, understanding things from people's perspective, like looking for win-wins, looking for like how you can be synergistic together. These are things when I come out of college, I was a really good engineer, but we have a term, you may be familiar with this in your area too, we have a term that engineers are really good at talking to each other, but not to the rest of the world because we talk a
Okay.
different lingo, right?
Yeah.
And I remember on my first job as a consultant, and I had, and this was it turned out to be a really powerful process for me because when I was doing my first job as a consultant for a company, and I was in
Yeah.
a medical device company in the west of Ireland, and I had this really good idea and I knew it could really work. And I was presenting to the business and the engineering team. And I was so caught up in how good my idea was, I didn't think of all the people in the audience about what they felt it would be. And when I presented and I gave my solution and I asked for any questions, the senior engineer said, "That's a load of shit and that's not going to work." That they were literally his words. And I was so taken off guard, Jonathan. I didn't know what to say. He goes, "You've never been in medical device. You don't know. Have you thought about this regulation, that regulation?" And I didn't. He was listing them off and I hadn't got a clue. And I was so taken off guard and I didn't know how to answer. And I was talking to my own boss after, and he laughed at me. He goes, "Shay, welcome to the world of consulting." So it's what he did. He sent me on a negotiation skill course and conflict resolution course. And then
Oh,
after the
wow.
end of it, my goal was to go back and represent that same um, process because our project, because he believed in it too. And your goal is to get a proof of concept and a pilot done. And he taught me how to do it. And he taught me to get answers without giving them the answers. It was a very powerful and very, by the way, it wasn't manipulative. It was a win-win. It was totally
Sure.
in the right frame of mind. And the way he taught me to do it was perfect. And not only did I get the directors in the room saying, "Let's do a proof of concept," because this guy was still resisting, but it's how I
Hmm.
managed the meeting and led it ethically. And when we did the proof of concept and the pilot, not only did it do what I said it was going to do, it did more. And that project was adopted, that process was adopted in all their global plants around the world, and it won them CPD Company of the Year. And the reason
Excellent.
why I'm saying that, Jonathan, is that just through the power of communication was what that got that there. Because if I just stopped it the first time, I wouldn't have got anywhere. And that's the one thing. I was really good analytically and logically, even creatively, with thinking of new ideas of way to solve problems. But it's the communication bit. I cannot stress to you enough
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
helpful that has made my life over the last number of years.
I have to say I resonate with that, Shay. When I was in college, I did software engineering and physics, and I was lucky enough to do Erasmus and work on a synchrotron where I did nuclear physics experiments. So the CEO of the first company I ever worked for asked everybody to get up and sort of give a speech on something you could add value with. So I thought, well, I'll help everybody understand what nuclear physics is. I got up, I gave what I thought was a good speech, but I could see from the audience, it wasn't too many people, but only 3 or 4 people had actually read enough to understand what I was talking about. And really, that meant it was a terrible speech. I went away feeling dejected, even though I thought, okay, it's kind of a grandiose subject to talk about, but I felt there's no way I need to communicate. And it really pushed me on the point of whatever I communicate, I have to communicate to the audience and where they're at, not to
Mm.
where I'm at and try to bring them through a 5 year journey in 20 minutes. That's just not going to happen. So I didn't have the same follow through as you, Shay, but I definitely had the humbling experience of realizing you really need to communicate to the people, find out where they're at, and communicate from that point outwards, not from you back towards them. So I
Exactly.
can really appreciate, that being a super valuable lesson for myself as well.
Yeah, no, it is. And like, even as a consultant, like, and anything that I do, I'm there to serve. It's not about me, it's about them. So I
Mm.
always have to look at their lens and always think of that win-win. Always make sure that they're winning all the time.
Excellent. Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you very much, Shay, for taking the time out to spend it with us, explain what you do. And there may be people who are interested or not interested, but actually have a dire need as well to modify how they're working or the groups that they're working in or the company that they have. If people wanted to reach out and find you, Shay, how would they do that?
Good, Jonathan. Thanks. They can get on to me through futurestate.ie
Yeah,
or slynch at futurestate, or even just go Shay Lynch and you'll find me on LinkedIn. You know, I'm quite involved on LinkedIn at the moment, so it's a good place to find me and see what I do. I give a lot of content there if people want to learn more as well. So
maybe I 2 weeks ago I was had the chance to go into one of your webinars. If I could ask maybe for the next event that you're doing, you could maybe post it in this group, Shay, so people get the
I will indeed. Yeah,
opportunity.
I'm actually doing one specifically on systems thinking on the 29th of April. So I will absolutely. Thanks very much, Jonathan. I'll be delighted to put it there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you again very much for your time, Shay, and it's been a pleasure talking to you and look forward to talking to you again.
Likewise, Jonathan. Thanks very
Take
much.
care.
Bye bye. Have a good evening.